pay tribute to our dear friend, Frank Maurice. I am Barbara Rice, a friend of Frank and Lynn's. I'm honored to speak today, knowing that many of you knew him far better than I did. Here with us today are Frank's wife, Lynn, that most of you know, his sisters, Jody and Patricia, brother-in-law, Mike, nephews, Tristan and Colin, and Tristan's wife, Jennifer, and daughters, Lily and Hazel. Also with us are members of the Westport Volunteer Fire Department and visiting squadrons, including CAL FIRE, Mendocino, and Fort Bragg. Co-workers from Fort Bragg and Mendocino Century 21, and many other realtors. Several lifelong friends that traveled from Southern California, Oregon, and Washington. And of course, his many Mendocino Coast friends. Not here, but if Frank had his way, he would have had his two favorite dogs here, Captain and Lynn. Frank was born in Newport Beach on February 1st, 1955. Thanks. He was a middle child with an older sister, Johanna, or Jody, I've heard also called Pickle, and younger sister, Patricia, also called Dee Dee. They were raised in South Laguna neighborhood of Laguna Beach. His sister, Jody, said all of her earliest memories involve Frank, including the day they brought him home from the hospital. South Laguna was a small coastal town then, where kids rode their bikes all over, played ball in the streets, and the kids picked fruit from their neighbor's yard, whether the neighbors knew it or not. They lived a 5-minute walk from the beach and spent all day, every day in the summer there, swimming, surfing, playing on the beach, and later water skiing. Frank had a beloved German Shepherd, Toro, who went everywhere with him. He had Toro for over 20 years and used to say, "Toro raised me." Their great-grandparents were prominent pioneers Joseph and Catherine Yock, who owned a large ranch in Laguna Canyon and property in Laguna Beach. They built the first Hotel Laguna and the original boardwalk in Laguna Beach. The kids spent a lot of time at their grandparents' properties, running around, eating fresh fruits and vegetables their grandmother grew, and playing on the beach. Frank remained very close to their grandpa West. They continued to play tennis together well into his grandpa's 80s, and Frank called him every night to check on him before his grandfather passed away. Jody wrote, "The open, rolling hills behind South Laguna were a great place for kids to roam, build forts, and target practice. Frank received a .22 rifle for his 11th birthday and became a crack shot. He received a marksman's medal at summer camp the next year." Jody described Frank as brilliant, and although not a particularly good student in school, he had a natural affinity for math and science. He had a great memory and a natural gift for learning and remembering numbers. He was also an excellent chess player. Frank's favorite teacher, Ron Rodecker, with whom Frank built a lifetime friendship, once cast Frank as Scrooge in a school play, trying to help focus his energies. Frank loved it, and many years later, the good memories of that experience prompted him to perform in plays in his local community theater. The summer Frank was 12, his dad took him and his best friend, Craig Kennedy, who is here today, took about a trip to the tip of Baja, California in a Jeep. In those days, there was no road that went all the way down and few settlements, so it was quite the adventure. This idyllic description of Frank's early years is quite the contrast to things that happened next. Tragically, his mother died when Frank was 12, and his sister Jody said their lives changed overnight. His father's remarriage 2 years later caused a move to San Juan Capistrano. Frank borrowed an ID and ran away to Hawaii to live on the beach. After being a beach bum for a while, he returned to California to go to, of all places, Boonville High School, because they offered a flight school as part of their curriculum. A year later, he returned to Southern California after learning his father was terminally ill and needed his help on a large construction project of oceanfront condominiums in San Juan Capistrano. It was during that last year with his father that he acquired his building skills. And after his father died, the family sort of went their separate ways for a while. But his sister Jody said, no matter where Frank was or what was going on in his life, Frank always remembered her birthday and came for Christmas and other holidays. Frank had a lot of careers in his life. He worked in produce sales in the 1980s and 90s, selling to the wholesale markets in LA. Frank loved to travel, and his work often took him overseas to Thailand, where he worked with the university and the farmers to teach them to grow disease-resistant avocados. Later, he formed his own produce company called Escondido Produce and worked with farmers in Baja, Mexico, and Costa Rica to grow organic baby vegetables, which he imported and sold to the LA markets that sold them to restaurants. From 1998 to 2000, he worked at the Three Springs Ranch in Escondido, California as a sales manager selling avocados, oranges, and lemons. There, he met his most wonderful boss, Lynn. In 2001, Frank and Lynn moved to the Mendocino coast and got married the next year. He then worked for Origin Construction for 3 years, and starting in 2005, Frank and his crew from Origin built Lynn and Frank's house in Westport, designed by architect Paul Tay. Frank joined the Westport Volunteer Fire Department in 2004 and became an EMT. Lynn also became an EMT then, and she remembers being very impressed with how learning came so easy to Frank that he barely studied at all, while she had to work very hard to learn the material and pass the tests. Later, Frank completed the Mendocino Fire Academy Firefighter 1 course and the Fire Officer Training and Management course. He was elected fire captain of the Westport Volunteer Fire Department in 2006 and became their chief in 2014. For 3 years, Frank worked at the Westport Water District as a water treatment operator and helped the district come into compliance with the California State Water Board. In 2008, through self-study and the support of Paul Clark, Frank became a licensed real estate agent with the Century 21 Fort Bragg Real Estate Office. He served on the Coastal Mendocino Association of Realtors, CMAR board, for 2 terms, which has been described as 4 very long years. Last year, our good friend Gina Bell Smith nominated Frank for the Humanitarian Community Service Award, which he won due largely to his work with the fire department and his outreach to the community. One of Frank's roles on CMAR was to do new member orientations, and Gina Bell said Frank went well beyond his role and was very instrumental in helping her during her first years in real estate. And that brings us to what we all know about Frank. What a good heart he had. He was truly a man who would do anything for anybody at any time of the day. I asked the local realtor community for their impressions of Frank, and they shared a lot with me. But what is funny is that they all said the same thing, almost the same sentence. Frank, he was always upbeat, positive, and helpful. He was always ready with a hug, a smile, and a great attitude. He was always positive and enthusiastic. One of the sweetest comments came from Cheryl Covington. She sat near him in the office and often overheard him speaking to Lynn on the phone. She said, what struck me most was his love for Lynn. I would hear him on the phone with her, practically cooing as he spoke to her. You could hear his love and concern for her through thick and thin. It was very inspiring to hear such sweetness coming from a man, she added. Several described Frank as a person who would literally give you the shirt off his back. He wasn't a collector of material things, but loved giving to others, not just of things they might want or need, but of his time, his attention, and his inexhaustible energy. He loved people and was as good a listener as he was a talker. In the Westport community, he was the person they called first with any problems or emergencies, and he often negotiated conflicts between neighbors here. He would make himself late or drop what he was doing to help, and he did that exactly one time when he was taking Lynn to a volunteer appreciation and awards dinner. A call came in about a dog that had gone over the cliff, and Frank stopped what he was doing to oversee the rescue. I know that was not the only time that Lynn had to wait while Frank took care of others. Friendships were exceedingly important to Frank. His loyalty and devotion to friends is reflected by how many are here today. His closest friend, Craig Kennedy, the one that went on the Jeep trip with him to Baja, he met on the first day of kindergarten. They remained friends all these years, talking on the phone at least once a week throughout the friendship. Many of those that are here are from Southern California and knew Frank in high school. That favorite teacher of Frank's, Ron Rodeker, wrote to Lynn, "Frank was a relentless force of kindness, and his love for other people dominated his presence. He is irreplaceable and will be missed by so many." Susie Francis wrote, "A wise priest once said, 'Humility is not about thinking less of yourself, it is about thinking less about yourself.'" And that was Frank. He was always doing something for somebody, always giving. If you were in trouble, if you needed his truck, his help, anything at all, he was there. And finally, no description of Frank would be complete without reference to his love of animals, a trait he and Lynn shared. I mentioned earlier that he had his dog Toro for 20 years. He also owned and rode a horse, General, for 35 years. When he met Lynn, she owned 2 horses, and Frank immediately took to caring for them as though they were his own, and he loved being able to ride on the beaches of Mendocino with Sneaky and Shadow. He is survived by furry friends Captain, Lucky, Voodoo, and Otis. I'm going to close with a poem attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson that Lynn asked me to read. It's also a favorite of mine, and I think it sums up Frank very nicely. To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. I think all of us can say Frank clearly succeeded.
Yeah.